You're listening to Boobies and Newbies, brought to you by the Frolic Podcast Network. Welcome to Boobies and Newbies, the podcast that asks novice romance readers to think outside the dick in a box and brave the unbridled world of erotica. I'm your host, Kelly Reynolds, and today we are diving into another recent romance release that, while contemporary in setting, is in fact a retelling of an age-old Jane Austen classic, just with a lot more pasties and body glitter. But before we get into that, a brief reminder that you can listen to past episodes of Boobies and Newbies anytime you want on your favorite podcast app or on our website, boobiesandnewbies.com. You can find and follow the podcast across social media at Boobies Podcast. If you're a fan of the show and you've got 5 minutes or so to spare, I would greatly appreciate if you'd left us a review on Apple Podcasts. Those reviews make all the difference. And last but not least, if you feel like showing the podcast a little extra love, might I recommend you join us on Patreon. We have got monthly patron-only events, early sneak peeks, bonus clips, so much more, and you gain instant access to it all for as little as $1 a month. You will, of course, find links to all of the above in today's show notes. And now that that's out of the way, please join me in welcoming today's guest. When you decide to read a romance rooted in the world of burlesque, it's only appropriate that you seek out a guest who knows burlesque. And I mean burlesque beyond the Christina Aguilera Cher movie, which I happen to adore for all the right reasons. I was first introduced to Queenie von Curves via an art collaboration she did with my good friends over at Feminist Book Club. On top of her work as a performer, she is also the producer for Twin Cities chapter of Bare Book Club. I could not be more excited to discuss this book and the world of burlesque with her. Please join me in welcoming Queenie von Curves.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it is my pleasure. And I have to start by asking, in the world of burlesque, how do performers feel about the film Burlesque?
To put it delicately, we're not fans. Only because it never should have been called burlesque.
Agreed.
It's not that the film itself, it's one of those like guilty pleasure movies.
Absolutely.
Let's be honest. It's got Cher, it's got glitter. It just like Cabaret was already taken, Showgirls was already taken, so they decided to put burlesque on it, which it's just not accurate. That's my only issue with it. Don't call it burlesque unless it's burlesque. That's the only issue we really have with it.
Yeah, no, I completely understand that. And I think I kind of imagine there being like some backlash from the burlesque community with that movie, the same way I envisioned there being a lot of people within the BDSM kink community having issues with 50 Shades of Grey. So I just
perfect analogy.
Wanted to get some confirmation about that. Although I will say between burlesque, cabaret, and Showgirls, oof, those are three of like my all-time favorite films to rewatch over and over.
For sure. They are all excellent films. I just, what would you call burlesque without burlesque? Because you can't take Cabaret or Showgirls, but it definitely falls more under like that genre of performance art than burlesque.
I'd call it Christina.
That's fair. That's fair. Because we have just Cher, so why wasn't it just Christina?
It's true. I mean, let's be honest. It's just like the minute that she starts singing in that show, you're like, well, this is just you having a solo space now. Like, just sing whatever you want.
Yeah, for sure. It was her moment to shine, and I'm so glad she had that.
It's true. If anybody, by the way, has not seen Burlesque, I do recommend watching it. Not as an accurate portrayal of what burlesque is, but just for your own enjoyment. Stanley Tucci is in it, and like,
what a dream! I love him.
Oh, any excuse for the Tooch. I am here for it. That man knows how to rock a bare head like nobody else.
Oh, the Tooch.
Oh, the Tooch. So good. Where's the Stanley Tucci fanfic romance novel? I feel like that's missing. And I need it. So I'm going to put that out into the universe and manifest it, hopefully.
I hope you have an episode for that in the future, for sure.
I do too. We'll circle back to it when the time comes. But in the meantime, I'd love to know a little bit about you, what you do, because it seems like you've got you wear a lot of hats. We'll put it that way. So tell me about all your hats.
Sure. So I am a burlesque performer here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I've been doing burlesque for 12 years. I come from a dance background, but I came from a more traditional dance background where I was viewed as having a wrong body. And that was a constant frustration for me. And so I gave it up and did theater and costume design. I still had that performer theater bug, so to speak, that I couldn't totally leave. And then I stumbled into a dive bar one night and there was a live band and burlesque on stage. And I was like, what the fuck is this? This is the coolest thing I've ever seen. It was such an empowering moment that I was like, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine being able to do that. That's so cool. And so I kind of became a burlesque super fan for a while and made friends. And finally the producer of the show was like, hey, you should probably do this. And I was like, sure. And then I fucking ripped the Band-Aid off and I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. And I had my moment. And I originally thought it was gonna be a bucket list thing, oh, I did it. I tried burlesque. That's great. And I never looked back. It was for me, it was a way to reclaim my body, reclaim having a dance outlet. And a kind of an escape. I feel like Queenie is a sliver of who I am and then exploded. So I got to take that outgoing, sexy, never wrong, never fat, never stupid, beautiful part of myself and get to put it on and be completely like that. And it's been the best therapy I've ever had in my life, to be honest. So,
that's a great way to put it. Cause I know I wear a lot of hats too, but one of them, none of which are burlesque, though I wish it was. But one of them is that I do teach some online creative writing courses for a university, and I get a lot of students who will talk about how the reason they first gravitated towards writing or art at any form of creative expression was as a outlet, a therapeutic outlet for whatever, pain or trauma that they were dealing with in their personal lives. And I think art is any form of art is one of the best ways to not only express yourself, but just kind of rediscover things about yourself, discover new things about yourself, and also deal with anything that's going on and maybe say goodbye to past parts of yourself that you don't want to deal with anymore and embrace the new side. So I love to quote Alexis Rose. I love this journey for you.
Yes. Always a good person to quote. And art as an outlet has always been important to me. And during the pandemic, burlesque is an in-person art form. It requires an audience. It requires a space. And so pandemic shut down burlesque shows. One of the first things to go was live performance. It was gone. And so I kind of felt I didn't have that creative outlet part of me, and it reinforced the fact that I need one. And so what I did kind of to continue my body therapy journey through an art outlet is that's how I came up with the curvy canvas, which was which is my painting project. And I joined up with Feminist Book Club Box for their Fat Liberation Month and did that. And so, it's a cute, just kitschy concept of body impression paintings using my boobs or my butt and then making them into something cute and kitschy. My donut boob or,
I love that.
My boob berry or, anything like that. And it became a really creative, but also really fun outlet being stuck in the house. It was this way to not only have a creative outlet, but also to put a fun twist on things. And I expected to just do a couple, but there were a couple local art markets I got to be a part of. And I was already a fan of Feminist Book Club Box and we connected that way. And so I have an Etsy. So it's just been kind of a really beautiful, spontaneous art outlet for a while I couldn't have people around. So
yeah. Oh no, absolutely. I think a lot of people during the pandemic, we saw the baking phase that a lot of people went through. We saw the at-home crafting, like whether it was knitting or picking up a Bob Ross art kit. I mean, there were just so many different phases that people went through in the pandemic that I think kind of reinforced the fact that even if you are the biggest homebody, the biggest introvert, there is still a piece of you that needs connection with other people. And performance, I come from a theater background. Performance is something that gives you that. I mean, it was truly one of the things I missed the most during the last couple of years has been going to live shows. Yeah. Like it just of any kind. Like I miss concerts. I miss theater performances. I miss going to open mic nights and karaoke nights. Like just seeing other people and having this shared interest and connection with whatever is going on there. It's something that I'm really excited is starting to open back up and come back, because I'm with you. I need it. It.
It was another way to reclaim my body too, which is like has been this journey for me, is to like, you know, take these over sexualized parts of me and then reclaim them and then make them fun, you know? So that was a really great outlet for me. So I'm starting to tiptoe back out and hopefully be bringing back specifically Bare Book Club, hopefully spring or summer this year.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because I follow the page, but I'm not fully versed in like how Bare Book Club works.
Sure.
And I'd love to know more about that, especially because if anybody's listening that's in the Minneapolis area, you know, I lived there for a year and I absolutely loved it. And I'm so sad I was there during the year that I didn't get to experience any of these things. So I'm going to have to come back specifically for these events.
Yeah. So Bare Book Club, I'm just the chapter. It's a whole organization. It was started by Michelle and Moore in Chicago. And the concept is the idea. Okay. So bare minimum, it is what it sounds like. Bare Book Club. It is a live literary event. We read out loud to the audience and we do it in the nude. That's its bare bones. Yep. Yep. And it's fantastic because it's such an empowering experience to be completely in control of your own nudity, to also have it be present in a space where it's not over sexualized. The idea of I can be naked and hot and smart all at the same time. Let me blow your minds. I'm going to read you some literature.
All three? No. Stop it.
Yeah. It's unlike anything else I've ever done. And it's unlike anything else people have experienced when they come in. They're just like, I didn't know what I was in for. You know, I had a basic understanding, but like, this is different or more than I expected. You know, like I forgot y'all were naked and I didn't think that was possible. Like, you know, it really becomes this like shared intimate experience of like a literary salon. And it's it's my favorite thing that I do, honestly. So it's an incredible experience, and it's in cities all over. It's all over the United States. It's also
I'm gonna have to do my research.
Yeah, there's even some in other countries as well.
Oh, we're going global with this nudity salon. I love it.
Yeah, it's really incredible.
Now, is it just the readers, performers that are naked, or is anybody? Okay, I was like,
yeah. No, it's still definitely like a performance art, you know, so it's, you know, people come in and they sit and they observe the art, and the readers are in the nude and they're also the only ones reading. But I find, everyone does the chapters kind of unique to themselves based on like where they are, who their readers are, et cetera. The bare bones is the same. I find that the most successful shows are the ones that are the most casual. Like, you know, everyone's nervous. We're naked. You're watching us naked. Everyone's nervous. It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
You know, but having it be like a really shared experience, even though we're the readers, like in between readings, there's a lot of like back and forth with the audience, between the readers. And it really helps create this like more, we got this. It's okay. Like we're all in this together. And then once that kind of edge comes off, everyone just like has such a great time. Everyone learns something. You know, each month is a different theme. So that's what guides our readings. Yep. So, you know, people come sometimes based on theme. Sometimes people come every month. some people are like, what the hell is this? And they come and then they're like,
go.
yeah. And then, so many times afterwards, people are like, I had no idea what I was in for, and this is fantastic, and I'm coming back. It's just, it's just unlike anything else right now. And I think that's fantastic. And we get to read. It's like, who reads out loud anymore? This is great.
I just hear the words Bare Book Club, and I'm like, that's enough. That's all I really need to know to want to attend an event and just see what we've got. But no, that sounds like so much fun. Well, okay, I feel like you're also mentioning so many things that connect so well with the book that we're going to talk about today. But before we dive in, where can all the good people find and follow you and see what's coming up next on your, what I'm sure is going to be a massive event calendar in the near future?
Yes. So you can find my personal account, Queenie von Curves, on Facebook and on Instagram. And then Bare Book Club Minneapolis has its own Instagram and its own Facebook fan page. And then I also have a Curvy Canvas Etsy and the Curvy Canvas Instagram. So you can kind of find me in all over the place.
And if you are a connoisseur of donuts like I am, you absolutely need some donut booby body art. That's just, it's two of my favorite things. Like I feel like a lot of the stuff that people give me as gifts are either donut themed or boob themed because of the podcast. And so I'm just like, it's the best of both worlds.
It does seem to be a beautiful overlap between donuts and boobs.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is.
I mean, they're both great. That's what it is.
That's fair. That's very fair. Agreed.
I love it. Well, let me tell everybody about what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm like I said in the beginning, I'm really excited to get your viewpoint on this book because it is the first romance I've read that's set in the world of burlesque. That's not to say there haven't been others. I'm not pretending that I've read every romance novel ever written, so nobody come at me. But I do remember distinctly, like a few months back, putting out feelers on Twitter, just asking if there were books that people knew about that had burlesque in them. And by happenstance, Vanessa King, the author of today's read, said, I have a book that's coming out in a few months that is about burlesque. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is meant to be. So I'm very excited to tell everybody that the book we will be talking about today is A Certain Appeal by Vanessa King. And this is Vanessa's debut romance, published November 2021. It's available on Amazon for $11.99 Kindle edition. You know, it's newer, it's more pricey, but that's okay. And A Certain Appeal is also a modern retelling of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. So while I don't think you need to have read Pride and Prejudice or be familiar with Pride and Prejudice to read and enjoy this book, I will say, if you are familiar with whatever iteration of Pride and Prejudice you are familiar with, it will make it a more enjoyable experience, I think. So before I give the synopsis, I'm curious, Queenie, what's your experience both with romance novels and with Pride and Prejudice in general? Because it's often an early form of the romance novel that we draw inspiration from in today's romance.
Sure. So I'm a total nerd, and so I am actually a huge fan of Jane Austen. I've read Jane Austen since I was a kid.
Wonderful.
It's one of the family favorites. We've read them all. We've watched all the movie renditions. Sense and Sensibility is also a favorite of mine. So that was really excited to hear that, because like being a nerd, like again, you don't need to know Pride and Prejudice to enjoy this book, but it's so cute when you do know Pride and Prejudice, because there's just enough little cute nods to it that you're like, oh, I see what you did there. Like, it's very, very cute. I honestly don't have a lot of experience in romance novels specifically. I like reading nonfiction and biographies and older literature.
Okay.
Just kind of what I gravitate to. Also, as a queer person, romance novels don't naturally kind of necessarily historically go queer.
Very true.
So, you know, you kind of naturally lean into something you can relate to on a personal level. And so most romance novels don't cater to the relationship that I have. So that's why I just haven't naturally gravitated towards them. But I was very appreciative that there was some LGBTQIA representation in here. I was delightfully surprised about that. So,
and you are not alone in having that experience with romance as well, or lack of experience with romance novels in general. I know that we've had plenty of guests on the show who the reason that they haven't really gravitated towards romance is because they feel like, well, it's not a genre that represents me. And perfectly understandable. I mean, that's how I feel all the time as a fat woman. It's just like, well, where's my romance? Where's my love story? And I will say there are authors that are making plenty of strides now. There should be more, let's be honest. But I'm happy to tell you there are a lot of wonderful LGBTQIA relationships and romance today. So if you ever need recommendations, let me know.
Perfect. I've just like leaned more into like historical or erotica. It's like,
ooh, and those are great too.
Yes. But like romance is like this thing in the middle that like I just haven't been exposed to within like queer literature. So I'm excited to hear that there's representation there. That's awesome.
Yes, absolutely. So we'll be sure we'll get you some recommendations.
Perfect. Thank you. I love recommendations.
Yeah, but I'm excited though that you were able to dive into, I mean, obviously you have the connection with burlesque, but I love that you have that connection with Pride and Prejudice as well, that like made this an enjoyable read. So that's exciting. Let me give everyone the synopsis for this book, and then we will dive into our conversation. And I think if you do know Pride and Prejudice, it's pretty evident just from the synopsis and the character names that this is Pride and Prejudice, like in a modern context. So here we go. After a betrayal derailed her interior design career, Liz Bennet found a fresh start in New York. Now an executive assistant by day and stage kitten by night, she's discovered a second home with the performers at Meryton, Manhattan's top-tier burlesque venue. Love's the last thing on her mind when she locks eyes with Will Darcy across the crowded club. The spark between them is undeniable. That is, until she overhears the uptight wealth manager call her merely tolerable. Bennet is determined to write Darcy off, but once their besties fall head over heels, they're thrown into each other's orbit again and again. Each encounter begins to feel more heated than the last, but is their chemistry enough to topple that terrible first impression? What's more, when a charming newcomer arrives on the scene with accusations against Darcy, his claims leave Bennet torn. And when a sudden development leaves Meryton's fate in jeopardy, she will have to decide who to trust in time to salvage her design dreams, her heart, and the stage she shares with her found family. Oh boy, there you go. Thinking about it, I almost am jealous of people who don't know Pride and Prejudice who read this book, because there are specific characters in Pride and Prejudice that you know just by the name. You know Elizabeth Bennet, you know Will Darcy, and you absolutely know that dirty, no good newcomer, Mr. Wickham, is bad news. And so it's hard for me to like read a retelling of Pride and Prejudice, because the minute you meet Wickham, I'm just like, well, we know he's bad. Like, he's not going to be good.
Yeah. And when like she writes off Darcy, you're like, oh, just you wait.
Just you wait. Yeah. So overall initial impressions, what do you think?
I really enjoyed it. Again, like I don't gravitate to romance novels. And so, I have to be honest that I'm a super reader, but I like kept putting off reading it just because I was like, well, it's a romance novel. And you just have these assumptions when you aren't part of that group of literature. You just have these assumptions. And actually, I was getting tattooed the day before, and I was like, perfect. I'm going to read this book while getting tattooed.
Yes.
And I devoured it so quickly, it only lasted half my tattoo appointment.
Oh my gosh. First of all, what did you get tattooed?
Oh, I got a realistic weed leaf on my butt cheek.
Love it. Secondly, I love that idea. And I guess just because I've gotten the tattoos I have are like not the most massive or intricate, but I'm like, ooh, now I kind of want to get one, like specifically so that I can bring a romance with me to read at the tattoo shop and just be like, yeah, that's right. Here it is.
And my wife was tattooing me, so it made it even more fun.
Did you read aloud? Did you read?
I should have.
Oh.
I would have moments where I would like giggle, or I'd be like, oh.
Yeah.
My wife, Emmy, would be like, okay, well, I can guess what part you're reading right now, you know?
Well, okay, so I know we mentioned that you're a newbie, as we say on this podcast, to romance. What were some of the assumptions that you had heading into the book? Because I like our character in this book kind of explains that there's a lot of ways people have misconceptions of like what burlesque is.
Yeah.
That's something that kind of becomes a topic between both Bennet and Darcy throughout the book, is her kind of trying to explain to him like why she's into burlesque and like what it does for her. And I feel like that's probably a thing in real life as well, is that people have a very specific idea of like what burlesque is, and just as they do have an idea of like what romance novels are. So what's been your experience with that?
I guess the stereotype of romance novels that I kind of just like have heard enough to kind of believe, just that the writing is poor, that the storylines are like so unbelievable and unattainable that it's hard to like see yourself in these situations.
Sure.
And then that the sex scenes are overly prevalent to the point that why is there a plot anyway? And that they're just completely bogus. And I was happy to find that like none of those were part of this book. Like I enjoyed the style of writing. It really was more heavy on the romance than it was on the sex scenes, which like I'm all about a sex scene, but if I want a sex scene, I'm going to read erotica.
Yeah. Oh, for like if that's like the
I want to go in,
the intention.
I want to dive in, like, you know. Yeah, and so and it was relatable. You know, it was relatable, these like first encounters, you know, that don't always determine like actually where the relationship is going to end up. And you don't always know a person's true nature, which is huge in Pride and Prejudice and also very evident in this. And then I loved that also it was still a novel of manners. You know, Pride and Prejudice and Jane Austen is a novel of manners where it makes fun of like stuck up people and some manners are like you don't understand them. And that was very evident in like how Darcy approached burlesque.
Yeah.
Of not knowing what to do, saying the wrong thing, making terrible assumptions that are not true. And then, you know, Bennet putting him in his place was very nice comparison.
Yeah. I have to say, as far as like, especially for being a debut novel, I was really impressed. Like and that's not to say that there aren't fantastic debut novels. There are plenty of them that we've read even just for the podcast that I've been like, wow, this is the author's first book. This is great. But I felt like there was a really clear voice. I felt like there were so many characters because we have, you know, everybody who works at the club, and then we have Darcy, and I'm probably just going to end up calling them their names from Pride and Prejudice. So I'm like, Bingley, we have Mr. Bingley, but I feel like all the characters still had their own unique voices. Like I loved Ming, one of the burlesque dancers. I loved Jane, I loved that Jane was also gender swapped to be her male roommate. Yes. I thought that was great.
And it kept Jane as the name too, which was like refreshing because it's like, what is gender? You know, like I loved that too. Yeah. Exactly. And I identified a lot with Ming just because of the descriptions of the type of body she had and the kind of, I love that it talked about how joyful her burlesque performances are. And I identify a lot with that of being like very like fun and joyful and celebratory. And so it was really nice reading descriptions of Ming because I felt a little at home there.
Yeah. I felt like there was some great representation all around. We had, you know, somebody performing with a bigger body. We had the silks, the acrobatic performers. I thought that was great. We had LGBT
Gin and tonic.
So
with their matching butt tattoos. I was like, when they broke up, I was like,
You ruined the tattoo. It's like if you took those like best friend plastic necklaces that people gave each other from like Claire's in the 90s, but you tattooed it on your butt cheeks, and then you took away the friends, and one of you is just going to be best for the rest of your life.
Oh.
But no, I felt like everybody had their own unique voice, and I always knew who each person was. And I feel like that's hard to do just when you're talking about like the two main characters, let alone this whole cast of like supporting characters. So I was really impressed. I loved the world. I thought the world was really cool. I've only been to New York once, but I was like, this could be anywhere. Like, I mean, I know they go around to the different neighborhoods and they're at a different bar every day. But again, that could be Minneapolis. Like that could be Chicago. Yeah. So, I was in it to win it with this one. I really did enjoy it. And I loved all the Pride and Prejudice connections. I mean, I think there were definitely lines like directly pulled like from the OG text.
100%. Yeah. And then the concept of like the Pemberley estate.
Yes.
You know, being the final like performance venue. I was like, oh my God, I love it so much. Yeah. Little things like that. I would just be like, oh, it's so cute. Like, but it wasn't overwhelming either. Like these were still different people. You know, the plot similarities were really enjoyable.
Yeah.
But they definitely became well-rounded characters in their own right too.
Yeah. Now, I'm curious, I want to know how you felt about this specific conversation that Darcy and Bennet have, because this is something, I listen to a lot of podcasts related to like dating and relationships. And so I think it was Nicole Byer's podcast I was listening to where she was, love it. But I think she was interviewing, he's a male escort who like gets hired out and like flown out all these places. And I always love hearing conversations with sex workers when they're talking about how the question I feel like a lot of people have for them is like, well, how does this work with like your personal life? Like, how can you have a relationship? And I really liked this conversation that she had with Darcy where he specifically asks her, does your boyfriend let you do this?
Puke. We get that all the time.
God. Yeah, that one was one where I just was like, ugh. But also I understand like where I get where he's coming from in that I think that he was kind of the voice of people who don't necessarily understand burlesque. And he was the one asking the questions, and that she would kind of put him in his place and explain things to him, which happens more than once in the book for sure.
Yes, which I liked. I really liked that she was such a strong protagonist. And was totally fine with putting this man in his place because he wasn't listening.
No.
Like, that's why she had to do it twice. You know, he was not listening. So yeah, I really appreciated that aspect of the novel it wasn't necessarily plot centric, but it was really important, I think, in the character development of Bennet.
I agree. There's, I'm trying to think of the other spot I was thinking of with them. Oh, it's when she talks to him about like, why do people do burlesque? Like, why is this the choice? And, you know, she says like, it was more of like a challenge for herself, like, which I totally understand. 'Cause she's like, not everybody can do this. Like, not everybody can get up on stage and do this, and respectably fine. Like, that's, you know, absolutely fine if you can't. But I like, she told this story too about like a woman who had given birth and she had been like nursing and everything, and like getting into burlesque was like reclaiming her boobs. And I was like, that's wonderful. But I think this book did a great job of kind of showcasing a lot of stereotypes that people might have about this world, which is something that I connect to in terms of the romance novel community. I felt like this is something that I'm like, this applies like across different communities where you can see, oh, so people are asking similar questions. And I think the reason I saw so much crossover between like why people have misconceptions about romance versus why people have misconceptions about burlesque is because it all is kind of rooted mostly in women's pleasure and women's bodies and sexuality. And
that scares the shit out of people.
Yep. Very frightening, especially to men.
Yep. Oh, it's so overwhelming.
just can't handle themselves. But yeah, and it all leads to a really interesting conversation she has with Darcy about how this isn't like, I'm not doing this for your pleasure. This is not for like foreplay. This is not a sexual act. It's kind of what you were saying, where it's for enjoyment. It's for empowerment. It's whatever thing is motivating you. This is not by any means my way of picking somebody up to take home for the night.
100% no. Yeah, definitely. I really appreciated that aspect in this. You know, we get that a lot. And that's another reason why I think it's, for me personally, it's really important that people understand that burlesque is not sex work. You know, burlesque is a performance art. And some people try to lump burlesque performers into sex workers. And I don't think that's fair for sex workers, mostly, because sex work is one of the toughest fucking jobs in the world. And burlesque has its own difficulties and challenges and is hard work, but it just doesn't overlap.
Right.
It's not the same thing, you know? And so I think that's always a really important distinction for people to understand, is that burlesque is not necessarily, this sounds kind of crazy, burlesque is not necessarily for you. Like, you know, you're coming to enjoy the atmosphere, the feeling, the confidence, the empowerment, the beauty, the sexiness, the sexuality, the sensual, sure. But it's not for you to touch, grasp, take over, control at all. The control is all in the person that is allowing you to have that experience. And we want you to have that experience. We want you to come and enjoy yourself and feel something and get something out of it. But like, we're offering that to you, so you're not in control of the situation. And I think that's a really empowering thing. Yeah. But I think it's something that's kind of hard for some people to get maybe the first time around.
No, and that's,
or without having a conversation.
That's interesting, because I feel like that, and I've only been to a couple burlesque performances, but I feel like that was never never prefaced to me when I went into it. And I think that that's something that if people heard or listened to, it would definitely influence the way that you experience it as well, because you're right. It's the performer enjoying themselves, vibing with their body, but you're there experiencing that experience that they're having. It's not there for you to experience like their body. It's for you to voyeuristic
and
in
it's
a way.
A journey. It's an experience. Yeah, like the whole thing is an experience and a journey. It's not just about, okay, when are her tits gonna pop out? You know, it's that's the thing, is it's not like that. You know, I mean, like the whole thing, you know, the old saying is, it's about the sizzle, not the steak. And that is classic for burlesque. You know, it's about the journey we're taking you on.
Right.
We're taking you on this journey, and it could be funny. It could be sexy. It could be powerful. It could be political. It can be all of these different things. And yes, it's a journey that traditionally goes with a striptease.
Yeah.
And that's scintillating. That's sexy. Like, why wouldn't you come and see that? But also, it's not something for you to literally grasp or to hold on to. It's just for you to be able to enjoy in this moment. And maybe it'll inspire you to feel sexier or feel more confident or feel more empowered, or go home and bang your partner. Like, you know, like these are the things that it's for. We want you to enjoy the experience. We're here to perform for you, but it's under our own control. And I think that's what makes it so sexy, because it is this like really powerful sharing of intimate space.
Yeah.
Without it being something that you can control. Like, you have to just let yourself go for the ride.
Yeah. And that's interesting that you say intimate too, because I know that comes up in the book too, is sort of like, how do you define intimacy? And like Bennet and Darcy having like different ideas of like, well, we can be at home and be together and be intimate, but like this is still part of my job, and like this is an intimate experience that people share. Do I want to go home with all of them? No, I want to go home with you. And
well, and intimacy can take so many different variations. Right. Like, I'm sorry, when I talk to my therapist, that's intimate.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
You know, like it is a really intimate experience for me to like pour out my feelings to my poor therapist who has to try to figure out how to help me. You know, it's like, that's a very intimate experience, but it doesn't mean I'm going to have sex with my therapist.
No, intimacy and sexuality, it doesn't have to coincide. It can, but it's not synonymous.
And I think that's really cool about this book because there's levels of intimacy. There's even intimacy between Bennet and Jane as
Oh my
roommates.
gosh,
There's a really beautiful intimacy between
I
them.
love their relationship as roommates, and I feel like anybody who's had, because honestly, this was very similar to like a roommate, one of my best friends who I lived with in Chicago for 2 years, and we lived in a tiny apartment, and there would be days where I would come home and he would be like laying in my bed. Like, he has his own bed, but he wanted some attention, some cuddles, whatever it might be. Like, I think anybody who's kind of had this living experience or this like friendship will 100% adore the relationship with Jane and Bennet, because it's heartstrings.
I know, I love their relationship. They are ride or die forever, and like are only trying to promote each other's happiness.
Yes.
And like, if you can find someone like that in your life, you should never let them go. It was really cool.
Yeah.
I liked that a lot.
With the exception of, I think it's Jin who like turns on them at the end. I will say I do love the found family aspect of this book as well, which I think is very common in theater. Like, I can't speak for other communities, but like for theater specifically, it's huge. Like, you do become family with the people that you're performing with because you see each other all the live long day and night. And so I loved the family that they had, and that they're a family because when they're having the rug ripped out from under them, they all band together and they all leave together. They all take a risk together and create their new theater together. So I really love that. I love found family stories and romance in general, and there are a lot of them. It's a more prevalent theme, I feel like, in the last few years. So
I identify a lot with that as being part of the queer community.
Yeah.
A huge part of the queer community is found family and, banding together and supporting each other, lifting each other up, because a lot of queer people literally lose their family in that journey. So I identified a lot with that kind of community aspect as a performer and then also as a queer person.
Yeah. Well, okay. So from one burlesque performer to another, the other not being me, but being Vanessa King, the author, who in her author bio talks about how she did spend a couple years like rooted in the New York City burlesque scene.
Yeah, I actually recognize some names in there of people I've worked with or are friends with.
Oh my gosh.
No, definitely. It's a big small world, burlesque.
Well, okay, so I guess my question then is, did she get it right? Like, were there parts that you're like, yeah, this is 100% the experiences that I've had?
Overwhelmingly so, yes. Definitely. I will also say that all cities are different.
Sure.
Like, all cities have like a slightly different dynamic or a different style of burlesque within like the concept of troupes or independent artists and things like that. Not everyone has like a venue that's, I think this family was definitely founded because of the venue.
Right.
And some families are founded because they're troupes. And some families are founded because they do the same style of burlesque. So I will say that part is different, I think, just based on what city and what group you're part of. But a lot of the descriptions of the actual performing or the backstage chaotic helpfulness, I don't know how else to explain it. It's like
Mad Libs while you're sewing on, glitter. Like, I love it.
Yes, the chaotic camaraderie, I feel like, is exactly what backstage is like at a burlesque show. You're always helping each other out, but you're also always like doing and spazzing out and joking and like changing something. And like, I remember doing my first burlesque show ever. I came back, I thought completely prepared and had nothing to put my pasties on with.
Oh no.
And I was like, oh my God, I didn't even think about that. How do you put them on? Oh my God, what do I do? And like, I have to like go on, right? And so everyone is like scrambling around and I don't know these people, I've only like met them maybe once, and here I am naked with my boobs out, like, how do I put it on? How do I put it
Everybody's
on?
like,
And one person takes the pasty, one person puts the tape on, and one of them put it on my boob and then shoved me on stage. And it was like, if they hadn't been there and if it hadn't been that concept of like, we're going to help each other get on there on time and all that kind of stuff. Like, if I hadn't had that atmosphere, I never would have gone on stage ever.
Yeah.
So that kind of backstage experience was captured really well, for sure. And Papa Pasty is entirely accurate.
Okay.
Of what we say for each other.
And then what do they call her? The stage kitten?
Yeah. And that's very common.
Okay.
Some people are starting to, kind of go away from that name specifically, just because sometimes in some places, people don't like the concept of kitten being kind of that old kind of pet name for a woman kind of thing, or some people are trying to stay away
got
from
a
gender.
sexualized context, I feel like,
and
too.
some people are trying to stay away from any gendered possibility
Great.
for people. So, but still, that is the most common representation of that job. But some people are going back to theater roots, and they're called stage managers. Because that's basically what they are. I mean, that's what they are. The show would not happen without that role. Like, Bennet's role is, I would dare to say, the most important role in a burlesque show. Like, things would not function without a kitten or a stage manager presence, just like theater. It would not happen. Like, they're the reason the ball rolls, that things happen on stage, that things can keep rotating, that the host can get up there. It's like, so for her role in this is extremely important. She might not be the star of the show, but like backstage she is.
Yeah, behind the scenes people. No, let me tell you, I stage managed for years through high school and college. Job. And it's a lot of work. And I remember we had sweatshirts that say, "We do it in the dark."
Techies do it in dark. And
hell yeah.
Thespians do it on stage.
And everybody, I mean, it's hard to be on stage. I get it. It's not for everybody. But it is just as hard, just as difficult to be doing the things behind the stage 100%. As well. So,
and I'm glad that representation was there. While the fact that she could also be sexy as hell, like, just because she's not the main stripteaser doesn't mean that she's not part of the show in that aspect as well. She was just as reclaiming her own sexuality on stage.
I would love to be a stage manager and get to wear a corset every night. Like, that's fantastic. Sign me up. Like, I'm here for that.
It's also twice as hard though, because you're in 5-inch heels in a corset doing grunt work. You're picking up clothes, you're running up and down the stairs, you're grabbing tips. Like, it is hard work. Yeah. And you have to look damn good, So.
It's true. Mm-hmm. Yeah, good on her. No, I thought that was great. And because I didn't realize going into it that I just assumed when I heard that it's Pride and Prejudice meets burlesque, I thought that she was going to be one of the burlesque stars, performers on stage. And so I was like, oh, this is a role I didn't even realize existed in burlesque. And so I love learning things. People know I'm a slut for knowledge. I love picking up on things. And so I really love that. I'm like, oh, okay, now I know what this is. I know that someone's got this job.
Yeah. And it's important that I think that representation happens just because of that, because burlesque shows would not happen without these folks.
Exactly. So. Well, and it definitely takes a while to get to it, but I will say that this book does bang. We do get some...
It's true.
We do get some sexier moments, although I will say, I feel like, as good as the sex scenes are, there are some moments that are just more bantery and steamy sexual tension that I found just as hot, if not hotter. Like, I think one of the scenes I highlighted that I was like, I'm highlighting this as a sexcerpt, but this is by no means a sexcerpt, is they're sitting at dinner and Darcy's like rubbing her thigh and like just kind of like stroking her bare thigh, and he makes mention of the fact that she's not wearing stockings or a garter belt that day, and I was like, why is this getting me so hot?
Yes. Or even like, I really liked the banter about seeing the impression of her butt cheeks on the window. Like, that was even hotter than the actual action of getting there. I was like, oh, that's so cheeky, so to speak. I was like, that is so fun. I just love those kind of quips, because that's something I identify with. Like, sex is great, but like, how great is it though when you have these like really sweet like inside jokes that you can just be like wink wink nudge nudge, like exactly. That's the level of intimacy that is like another level for me that I think is really fun.
Yeah, I'm just as into the moments of like people having their like cute conversations in bed or in the shower or wherever they are as I am them having their sexiest moments in bed. Like I want one, but I want them. I want it all. Like, I'm just like, oh, I love it. It makes the first one so much more worthwhile when it's like followed up with.
I like that it took a while to get to a sex scene because by the time you got there, you had the foreplay.
Yes.
It wasn't just like, And that's why I like don't necessarily gravitate to romance novels, because I'm like, well, they're just going to throw in a sex scene here and there and all over the place. And like, if I want that, I'll read erotica, you know, but this one like had that perfect build up to the sex scene. And then the sex scene was like visual and perfect, but it also wasn't 2 chapters. You know, it was like, you know, it was appropriate for like the journey that she was taking.
I felt that it worked really well. And I kept thinking, because I mean, whenever I've read Pride and Prejudice, whenever I've seen a Pride and Prejudice adaptation, especially the Keira Knightley, Matthew McFadyen one is like my all-time fave. I'm just like, it ends right when you know that they're gonna finally do it. And you're just like, please don't do that to me. And so I'm glad that we got to have like, I feel like I got a little bit of closure just in terms of the entire canon of Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah, it really did have like kind of almost like there was like a thing at the end. It was like it extended just a little bit further past where Pride and Prejudice did. So you get to like that little clip, you know, how movies are like, and then 5 years later, you know, it was like, it was that moment where you got to see it like come full circle.
Exactly.
In the new space and having them established as a couple and the family reclaiming the space and together as a group. And I really liked too, as an aside, I really liked that they presented that Bennet's parents were supportive of the shows and went and had a grand time. Yes. And I think that's really important, because like, I know it does happen for a lot of people in burlesque that they don't have family support, but at the same time, I think that also can become a trope. And so I was really pleased that they included this bit where her parents were supportive of this show and came, because I'm very lucky that my parents are super supportive and have always been, you know, fine with it. And not everyone has that story, but it does happen. And so I was really glad to have that kind of representation that, you know, parents can get behind this stuff too, you know?
Her parents, is it her cousin that lives in LA that's like moving to New York? Her cousin.
With her boyfriend, the chef.
And the chef, who I was like, ooh, I could have a whole separate romance novel just about them.
Those two.
Agreed. For real. Which, and you will find, if you do go on to read some more romance after this, that is a common thing amongst romance series, is that it's sort of like their own Marvel cinematic universe, where they will set up, an author will set up like, oh, this takes place in the small town of blah, 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 Vermont. And all of the books are going to involve the characters from blah, 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 Vermont. And you might see them.
Because then you have like a little establishment to build off of.
Yeah.
You know, this is going to sound a little silly, but it reminds me of like Sweet Valley series.
Oh, no, perfect. Exactly. That is exact. I mean, I said Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Sweet Valley makes perfect sense as well.
It's like you grew up with the twins, but then they had all these like random like offshoot novels about like Lila and, you know, the boyfriend and like things like that. And you know, the college level ones kind of like tiptoe into romance novel territory. So that might be my experience with romance novels.
You would not be the first person that's been on this podcast to say that was their introduction to romance, was Sweet Valley.
Yeah, they even had historical ones. They had ones where they went back. Remember, it was like the Lila Fowler, you know, history of, and it was all these like romances through it, and it was like my way to like sort of read about sex when I was in high school. It was very exciting, you know, because I got it from the library. It's fine.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I mean, if it wasn't the library, it was, you know, somebody's grandmother's Harlequin that was like tucked behind the couch. So I mean, we all have our introduction, and I think what's funny is that you don't even necessarily realize it like at the time.
Yeah, it's
like,
right, literally right now that I'm realizing that Sweet Valley is definitely a romance novel.
When I'll say I'll give as much shit to Twilight as the next person will, but that is one of the first book series that I do remember reading and being like, wow, I need to read the next one. I need to find out what happens. Like what's going to happen. And it was their relationship that I was like invested in, not the not the vampire werewolf part. I was like, whatever. Like, but it's, and then it was
invested in a relationship journey. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally.
And then it was the True Blood books, which is funny because now I'm going from another vampire recommendation. But vampires were big in like 2009, you know?
I
Like,
also feel like vampires and romance novels have always been hand in hand. Like if you go back and read Dracula,
yeah.
there's definitely a romance novel aspect to that, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Anne Rice
a lot of the
had
classic,
a fair share too.
Yeah. A lot of the classic monsters kind of overlap with romance because there's always like some sort of ingenue like wrapped up in like the monster to make them have feelings. For sure. Yeah.
The only thing that romance has done differently is basically take the romantic subplot of those stories and make that the main A plot storyline. Sure. And anything else is just extra. Really that is like what differentiates romance from like having a book that you pick up in general fiction that has a romantic storyline is it's putting the romance first and foremost. That's kind of like the main goal. And it ends happily ever after. That is a rule that some people will argue, but most of us agree on.
Sure. It makes sense.
Now, since we were on the topic of sexcerpts, did you have a specific moment that you wanted to perhaps grace us with? You read things aloud for Bare Book Club, so
no pressure. Woo! And I have clothes on though. This is very strange for me.
Okay.
So I guess this is what I would consider a sexcerpt.
Totally up to you.
I guess because I just identified so much with the more striptease element of this romance novel. And so I will actually be reading a little excerpt from the show.
Okay.
All right. So this is in the club. Ming's moved on to her sequin strapless gown. She teases the zipper down her side, holding the bust to her chest as the back of the dress peels away, revealing pearlescent flesh and the crimson rhinestone studding her bra band and shimmy belt. She dances her fingers over her ribs, trailing them sensually along the indentations. With a shift of her hips, she drops the dress to expose her bead-draped backside. I do a tease of my own, playing along my skin on the off chance there are eyes on me. Tipping my head to the side, I let my fingers light along my collarbone and slide up my throat. I reverse the route and repeat the cycle, keeping the motions idle. It's a move straight out of Burlesque 101. Employ your hands to direct the audience to imagine their hands in the place of your own. I catch him watching me again. His look is cautious but direct, and when our eyes meet, he doesn't avert his gaze. Bold move, Mr. Goodface. I jerk my chin towards the stage, giving him a hard time for missing the main event. He frowns, brows low, and I laugh. I can't help it. He looks baffled. Again, I turn to Ming. She's in the process of removing her bra. She takes her time, and the band repeats a few measures of the song, heightening the tension until the reveal. Flicking open the final hook and eye, she tossed the rhinestone double D cups towards the band. The upright bassist plucks the glittering garment as it sails above his head, draping it over his shoulder and resuming playing in one graceful movement. Applause fills the room, and Ming shimmies her shoulders, sending her nipple tassels spinning. As the audience celebrates her mammalian prowess, she lifts her arms overhead and flexes her left pectoral. Her implant-enhanced breast jumps, the tassel spinning independently of its mate. The room overflows with gasps and appreciative whistles. Ming bows, her feathered headdress sweeping the floor, and plucks the boa from the stage. She situates it with a practiced shrug, arms outstretched, her feathers draped over her like a Christmas garland. She grins, head high, inviting the audience to drink her in. As masterful as her peels are, this final beat is my favorite part of any number Ming performs. Stripped down, she is a lavish creature, all luxurious curves and extravagant, delicious joy. Her smile is a summons to join her in celebrating the sensory delights of life, every inch of her body softness a compelling case for indulgence. With a demure step, she descends the stage. There's an audible scraping of seats as odd diners make way for her, a Moses and pasties parting the Red Sea. I let her pass, then cut through the path she blazed to the stage.
I just love the writing. Like
I love it. And that's
Meryton
so perfect.
Prowess.
Yes, I love it. It's so I just love that description of her.
Yeah.
I just feel like it really personally captures so much of what I love about burlesque.
Yeah.
Is the tease, the explosion kind of joy that happens when you get to the end of a number and you get just like powerfully show your body for all it is and let it drink in. And then when she walks away, just parts the way.
Yes.
It's that concept of like, I feel like burlesque performers constantly have like a beautiful fourth wall where like they can choose to break it, but you can't choose to break it.
I love that.
Yeah. And I love that. And it's perfectly descripted here, just the way that all she has to do is walk and people part. She doesn't have to do a thing.
No.
That really captures the beauty of burlesque and the empowerment of it. I just love it. And her concept of like, all of us have had that moment, right? Where you're like, the person you're interested in might be looking at you.
Oh,
and you're not
sure.
positive that they're looking at you, but you're going to like make sure that they are looking at you. They're not going to forget that they were looking at you. And I love that description. It's so perfect. I thought that was a very sexy moment for her and for Ming and for the audience. It was really
her and Bennet and Darcy have a lot of like eye contact across rooms, like, ooh, he might be watching, but the lights are blinding me, so I can't tell. Yeah. Like, there's definitely like more than one moment that's kind of got this voyeuristic, element to it that I was like, ooh, yeah, because you're right. If this was an erotica as opposed to a romance novel, she would have started touching herself like in that scene and he would have been watching, and that would have been the scene, and it would have been very hot. That's not to say I think this scene works in the context of this book, but I'd love to read that erotic scene as well.
Yeah, but I think that's why this story is such a good comparison with burlesque. It's because it's that same concept. Like the voyeurism ends with being able to watch whatever's happening, and that's it. That's your line. That's all you get. Yeah, and the fact that Bennet uses so many elements that she's learned from burlesque to flirt in this relationship while still being in control of the flirting in this relationship with that concept of like trailing her fingers and learning why that's effective. Or the concept of eye contact is huge in burlesque. I mean, you can change the whole feel of a number by where you're directing your gaze. Yeah. I purposely love to make people uncomfortable when I'm performing. And the best way to do that is to make direct eye contact with someone in the front row. So that concept of, eye-to-eye intimacy, I think is a great comparison in burlesque and then also in their growing relationship. I love that.
Well, and I took exactly 3 pole classes because I bought a Groupon, and it bought me 3 pole classes. And so one of them, though, was a floor class, and one of the things we talked a lot about was like using your hands to kind of like guide where you want the gaze to be. And so that was something that I definitely saw in this book, is like every time they would not only like take the glove off, it would be like, now I'm going to trail it over here and I'm going to direct your gaze to my shoulder, and then I'm going to pull it down between my boobs, and your eyes are there now. And I just was like, ooh, yeah. Like it's, again, it's so much more than just taking the clothing off. I have my appreciation has been increased for sure. Like I'm going to run right out and see a burlesque show as soon as I get the chance. My scene comes later. And this
so to speak.
This is leading up to the first time they have sex, but there's something specific that happens with one of her pasties that I thought was fun. So I'll share a little sexcerpt from here. This comes much later in the book. We're at 78% on my Kindle.
I was very early on. That was like the first night.
So we're going from beginning to nearing the end. He kisses along my chest to the other breast, pulling down the bra cup quickly. The edge of my pasty catches on the material, tugging sharply enough that I yelp, then, moan. Darcy's brows go high, and I open my mouth to assure him I'm fine, but nothing comes out. The foreign mix of pain and pleasure mingles with my desire, and I swallow hard, weighing my response. That was good. Understanding lights in his eyes. Watching me, he moves to the pasty, kissing and nibbling his way, drawing his teeth along the underside of my breast until I gasp. He maneuvers up, then eases his teeth to get a grip on one of the points of the starburst. I take in a long breath, steadying myself. Then another. Do it, I command, though it comes out a rasp. He jerks his head, and the pasty wrenches free with a sharp, clarifying pain that has me arching my back. I let out a gasping cry. My pulse throbs in my raw nipple, the beat there almost as insistent as the one between my legs. And Darcy's mouth closes on me, his tongue laving my aching bud. I lose my words on another rasp of pleasure as Darcy grips my hips, tongue and lips soothing the buzz of pain from my breast. One of his hands slides between my shoulders, unhooking my bra, and I pull my arms free of the straps. I'll stop it there. But I do, first of all, I love that they have a conversation about it afterwards where she says, oh no, I kind of liked it. I hadn't really thought about that before, but I trust you. So like I was into it. But then the other thing is, and you don't see it in this specific excerpt that I shared, he's constantly asking for permission to continue. Like
yes.
the continuous consent in this scene
is so refreshing.
Yeah.
Because like I feel like even if it's something that we personally want or believe in, it's not always written in these scenes because it's not deemed like sexy or necessary or whatever.
Yep.
And that was something that popped out to me too, that in the sexual encounters, there is a constant check-in, a constant request for consent. And I thought that was really refreshing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because that was another thing that really stood out for me. And as someone who has ripped a pasty off of my nipple, it's pretty accurate.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done that, but I've ripped a Band-Aid off. You know, I mean, I'm just like, I can understand. No, but I feel like if you are deciding that you want to read more romance, a beautiful thing is that a lot of the romance that's being published now, you will see a lot of scenes like this. You will see a lot of not just one-time check-in consent of, you good? Can we continue? Right. But like, do you like this? How can I make this better for you? Do you want me to try this? Does this feel good? Like, and that's something that every time I come across it in romance, and it's happening more and more, I get so excited. I get so excited because I think for so long people just assumed that wasn't sexy in books. Like it was the same thing that we had years and years of romance without the mention of birth control or condoms. And now at this point, if I read a book where they don't mention birth control, I automatically assume someone's getting pregnant. Like
for sure. Yeah.
So we are seeing it evolve. I think a lot of the things that people assume about romance are very valid. They're not coming from nowhere. They're coming from a place of where the genre has been. But I do see changes being made, and I hope that continues to happen.
Yeah, I was really happy to read that, and I'm glad to hear that that's like becoming more common. That's really wonderful. Yeah, because it's so important for people to realize that is a totally normal and positive experience to have those check-ins while you're doing all the sexy stuff. That it, you know, it can even be sexier if you actually like explain what you're looking for or what's working and what's not. It's not weird. It doesn't break the spell.
No.
Like, why shouldn't everyone get the most out of this experience? You know? So
I wish more people liked talking in sex scenes in books because I just like talking in general. Like, why should I remove that from sex?
Yeah. I love when I'm like so comfortable and intimate with my wife, and you know, no matter what's happening, and like we could be having like a really intense sexual experience, and like sometimes something happens and you laugh and it's great. Like I love that. I love that it can be such like, it can be romantic and sweet and sensual or just like really sexy, and like you're also still a human being, so like sometimes you're gonna laugh, and I love that we can have those moments where we can just like laugh and then be like, all right, and then like you know get back into it. Or it
gets
but like
messy, or somebody knocks into something on accident.
It happens. Like there's no way you're gonna have sexual experiences without these things happening. Even with your partner of years, like these things are going to happen. And like I love the intimacy of laughing during any sort of sexual experience with someone you're close with. I just think it's fabulous.
I agree. I want more I want more laughing and sex scenes. I'm going to petition for it.
Also, when you laugh, often you do a kegel. So.
That's true. It's true. So there you go. Contractions.
So it can, depending on what kind of sex you're having, it could help.
There you go. I encourage everyone to laugh next time.
Yep.
Let's give this book a few grades. And on this podcast, we rate for heart, humor, and heat on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the very best that it could possibly be for you, of course. We all have our different scales. But let's start with heart. What do you think?
Heart, I would definitely give it a 9. I thought the heart was so there in so many different kinds of relationships. The heart wasn't only just romantic. There was heart between like roommate love, between family, between romantic experiences, between found family. So I think there was a lovely representation of heart.
And that's exactly how I typically define heart on the podcast, is that I love to see beyond the romantic relationships as well. And I feel like, in fact, I might go out on a limb and say that I feel like there was more, if not like just as much, if not more attention paid to like the friendship and found family relationships as there were with the romantic relationship. I'm going to give it an 8.5 or a 9. And I think the only reason it's not a 10 for me is I kind of wanted a little more time spent with Darcy and Bennet. Like, I feel like I maybe needed like 1 or 2 more scenes of just the two of them, because a lot of the time they are with their friends. You know, he's usually with Bingley. She's with Jane or the rest of the burlesque crowd. And a lot of the time he's like flying back and forth to California. So I think that was the one thing, like if I had a criticism for this book, that's probably the only one I have, is just that I do wish maybe there was like a little more attention paid to like the romance itself. But that being said, it's a very heart high book. And definitely. I love the relationships that we do have, except for the breakup of Gin and Tonic. That's just tragic.
I know. But you know what? That is also a very realistic storyline in burlesque, which is a bummer.
Okay.
Or like any performance arts community, I'm sure, with your experience in theater. You know, there's always going to be those people who are in it for the wrong reasons, or people who get caught up in it because of this thing or another. And like, I thought that was really realistic, though, to have that element of like having a breakup within it.
I agree. It's sad, but it happens. So c'est la vie. How about humor? What do you think? Laugh out loud?
I would give it like between a 7 and an 8, because I think the style of humor was really humorous, because it's going to be more like Jane Austen. There's going to be banter. It's a comedy of manners. Yeah. You know, it's making fun of like, you know, doing like little quips about like people's like uptightness and things like that, which carry very well into the burlesque circle. So not necessarily laugh out loud, but definitely like a constant chuckle at the bantering, and the style of it being the humor of Pride and Prejudice. I think she did a really good job capturing that.
Yeah, I think if people do really appreciate Jane Austen's sense of humor, I think you will really find some nice comedic moments within the book. And you're right, it's not so much situational comedy. It's not like screwball comedy. It really just is a lot of the banter that had me smiling, not laughing, but definitely like smiling about it. So I think I put it somewhere between a 6 or a 7. And honestly, I think that is fitting for the story. I feel like if it was uproarious laughter, it might not have had the same impact. So
and slapstick, any sort of situational stuff didn't really just make sense with the setup of it. So the banter was really enjoyable. Yeah,
cool. Well, how about the heat? I'm excited to hear what this means. Let me give you my personal scale of just how I normally go off of grading heat. And that is that if there's sex on the page, it's at least a 5. And that's only because there are so many romances that also are closed door. We never see beyond the bedroom door, or we only get maybe a few kisses here and there. But that's sort of where I come from on my grading scale. You are welcome to use it if you so choose.
So heat rating, I would probably give it a 7.
Okay.
Like, it wasn't like hot, steamy sex scenes the whole time, which was kind of my fear, just because I wanted a plot.
Sure.
Because this was based on Pride and Prejudice, so I was like into the plot concept. But what I really liked, the heat concept, what I really liked is there was so much like buildup.
Yes.
And I think heat for me is always more about the buildup than the actual like explosion experience.
Yeah.
And I think she did a really good job capturing the like anticipation and the flirting and the buildup, but then also like the heat where she was like kind of pissed at him because he was kind of being a turd. And that's kind of like a heat buildup too, because I feel like so often like anger and hotness, like it kind of brings the same kind of like really intense, invigorating feeling out. And so I think the fact that that was kind of like a spike in the middle of it, like helps that build of like really seeing who he was and letting herself feel these levels of heat towards him. Yeah. And that concept of flirting with eye contact and like some like little insinuations and hints and stuff like that can be so much sexier than just jumping on someone. So
yeah.
I thought it was some really good foreplay heat.
Yeah, we usually call it a slow burn in
a slow burn
in romance.
That's perfect, because did you know that burlesque numbers are often called slow burn?
Ooh,
yep.
I mean, it makes sense.
Yes, I mean, so like burlesque numbers that are usually like more classic and to like slower music or you know where there's less costume pieces to take off, so obviously it needs to be like a slower reveal. Those are called slow burns. That's a perfect comparison with romance and burlesque.
There's so much crossover. No wonder someone decided to write a romance novel about burlesque. Slow burns. And then the other thing you mentioned is we have an entire like trope within romance, enemies to lovers, that people love for exactly the reason you said, where there's that animosity and like it always ties into the sexual tension because there's some kind of other tension going on. And I'm with you. I love both of those things. I love a good slow burn. I love a good enemies to lovers. So yeah, the heat on this one, I would probably put between a 6 and a 7. And the only reason I won't go higher is just judging off of what else we have read for the podcast that's been, you know, like beyond as far as far as what's going on. But this is my kind of heat. Like this is the kind of heat, like on a personal scale, it would be more of like a 9 or a 10. However, in keeping with the podcast and our listeners, I'll keep it between a 6 and a 7.
That makes 7. Yeah, that makes sense for sure. Yeah.
Yay. Well, okay. Now having read this one, which, you know, we might call your first romance. I don't know. And maybe Sweet Valley was, you know, your first romance, but do you think you have an interest in reading more?
I think it would be, if it was something similar to this, like, I think I would need another thing I'm already interested in.
Okay.
So like this one, I think it was really effective for me because I am part of the burlesque community and I love Pride and Prejudice. And so both of those lending itself in this book made it really enjoyable for me. And I think the reason I enjoyed the Sweet Valley ones actually is because they were historical. I think maybe that would lend to me too, is like, I really like reading historical fiction. And so I think if it was a historical romance, then it would have that same concept that I really enjoy of it being like another time period, different elements to it. I think I would enjoy a lot.
Okay. Well, I think we'll be able to find you something. I think, you know, and obviously it's time for us to wrap up because the cat is walking across the screen and it knows it's time for dinner.
The cat was like, I don't even care what you're doing. It is time to feed me right now.
It's time for me.
Remember? See? We came full circle and we're talking about food.
It happens. You can't go an episode of this podcast without talking about food. It's impossible.
We're actually talking about pussy and food now.
Yeah. Again, we started with boobs and donuts and now we're on to pussy and food. There you go. I mean, and if that's not the best way to wrap it up, I don't know what is. But thank you so much, though, for joining me and taking this deep dive into romance with me.
Absolutely. Thank you. I was really excited to be a part of this. And thanks for getting me out of my comfort zone and reading something that I wouldn't have picked up.
Oh, my pleasure. That is always my pleasure. And I feel a lot more in the know as far as burlesque goes at this point. And I think the best way to understand it even more is to check out a show. So I hope everybody takes the time to at least look and see if there's a burlesque show happening near you.
There probably is. Yep. It's a lot more prevalent than it used to be. So
I love it. Well, pretty soon you're going to have to write your own burlesque romance novel so we can have at least 2 on our shelves.
Yes, and one will be queer as fuck.
Perfect. Something to look forward to.
Yes.
Thanks so much for listening. Boobies and Newbies is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts. You can follow Boobies and Newbies on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Boobies Podcast.